Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. A very warm welcome to you to this webinar from Digite. Uh, Today's topic, Agile Program Management, using Kanban to get it right. Let's get started. I'm still seeing people coming in, but let's get some of the housekeeping in place already. We'll have a quick introduction, and then I'll give you a little bit of an overview of Digite and Swift Kanban for those of you who may not be very familiar with us. And then we'll get on to the main topic for today, Agile Program Management. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. The session is being recorded, so we will share a recording with you. You don't have to worry about taking notes. As far as asking questions, for those of you who may be new to the GoToWebinar interface, there is a Q&A or a questions box to the right side of your screens. Please use that to ask a question at any time. And we will get to all of the questions at the end. Hopefully we have enough time to be able to get to them. If not, we will certainly follow up with responses to specific questions that that don't get covered. With that, let me introduce our main speaker today, Sudipta Lairi. He heads our engineering and product organization, and he's a Kanban Distinguished Fellow, an AKT and a KCP, accredited Kanban trainer and a Kanban coaching professional. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I head marketing at Digite. And I also dabble in Kanban and work with a lot of our customers who implement Swift Kanban and require Kanban training and coaching. Sudhi will give you a little bit more about his background. So let me give you a quick overview of Digite. Digite has been around for now nearly 2 decades, and we have been a pioneer in collaborative web-based applications for remote teams. Digite's acronym, by the way, is Digital Transformation of the Enterprise. So we actually were about 20 years ahead of our time in terms of the buzz that's around digital transformation. But that's exactly what we are helping our customers implement or do in terms of the different types of projects that our customers take up under the digital transformation umbrella. And our products cover these different facets: Lean, Kanban, Agile, project portfolio management, value stream management, DevOps, large program management, all of that. And our sort of main products are Swift Kanban, Swift Enterprise, and Swifties. Just a quick look at some of the use cases that Swift Kanban in particular goes through, and of course, he's going to cover the Agile program management piece. A large part of our user base tends to be about IT and software, and of course, whether you do Kanban or Scrum or Scrumban, whatever be the process that you follow, all of that can be very easily managed with Swift Kanban. We also have a number of users, probably 30% of our user base is outside of software and IT, and that's for marketing, product design, HR, legal, procurement. There are all kinds of use cases besides personal Kanban as well. So we have a really wide range of usage of Kanban in both agile contexts as well as in other contexts. Probably Sudhi might cover a little bit today, we'll see. But we have some pretty strong capabilities in the portfolio management space for visual portfolio management with Kanban, where we have a number of interesting capabilities of your being able to model your work hierarchies, whether they are programs, projects, tasks, or epics, user stories, and things like that. You can easily model those hierarchies across one or multiple Kanban boards. And then you can use a lot of the what we call enterprise services planning capability to really shape a demand, understand what your overall demand for your different teams are, and be able to prioritize the right things at the right time using capabilities such as this risk management capability that I'm showing you right now. And then, of course, we have a tremendous amount of capability in terms of statistical modeling, Monte Carlo simulation-based capabilities to forecast your system capabilities and be able to really set realistic expectations with your customers and be able to make your teams more predictable and so forth. All of the promise that Kanban has, we are really good at delivering that through the Swift Kanban capabilities that we have. The analytics is one of the very strong points of Swift Kanban, and we provide all of the typical metric that you expect from a Kanban board. In addition to that, we have plenty of other capabilities that if you haven't seen, you'd like to see. We integrate with a bunch of different tools to make sure that we sit sort of responsibly within your ecosystem of applications and help you manage your end-to-end workflows very smoothly. So with that, let me, sorry, there's the last slide here on some of our customers. And as you might see, we have some pretty well-known brands using our products. And we actually, very interestingly, teams as small as 5 or 10 or 20 people using our products to tens of thousands of users in a single organization using our products. So we have a really wide range and are able to sort of scale and support different use cases, different enterprises, different team sizes very easily. All right, so with that, I will hand over this to Suri. Suri, a warm welcome, and let's get started.
Thanks, Mahesh, and I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yep, it's in the not in the presentation mode right now.
Not in the slideshow mode. Yeah, I'm going there. Yeah, give me a minute. Let me just close this panel, convert this panel here, and let's get started. So once again, thanks everyone for spending the day with us, and hopefully we'll be able to set some of the issues around program management and some of the concepts around program management, and how you can use some approaches, some of the thoughts that are available within the Kanban body of knowledge to be able to actually do program management. A quick background of myself, been in the industry for about 3 decades and a very avid practitioner of Lean-Agile thought and principles. Obviously, we follow those principles within Digite very passionately, and have been part of the Kanban community since over 10 years now. What I hope that you will be able to take home at the end of the presentation is to really understand what is program management versus portfolio management. I think these two terms are used very interchangeably within the industry, and it often is pretty confusing. Where does one start? Where does one end? What is the scope of one versus another? So what I hope to be able to clarify and to give clarity is bring that insight of where does portfolio management focus on, where does program management focus on. Of course, talk about lean portfolio management, and then get into some of how you could actually go about doing an overall program management when you're working the lean agile way. So what is a program? Loosely said, a program is a collection of endeavors, and the endeavors could be projects, applications, your initiatives. So a whole bunch of it's not one single project or one single application. Typically, a program has got a much larger connotation where you're looking after a whole set or suite of projects or applications or initiatives, whatever is the semantic and the nomenclature that you use. And this collection could be based on any specific one or two or multiple dimensions. So you could be handling all the insurance program across the North America. So that would mean that you handle all the insurance customers that you have in the North American geography, and that would be a program that goes across multiple dimensions. So a program is nothing but a collection of endeavors grouped together under one or more dimensions. Obviously, very loose, very configurable. There is no industry standard that says it has to be done this way or it has to be done that way. It is entirely dependent upon how an organization wants to group these endeavors and really help itself to better orchestrate and be able to better manage that collection together. So let's understand portfolio management, because there have been tools around portfolio management, project portfolio management for umpteen number of years. A typical portfolio management would comprise of a prioritization process that would help the IT organization or any other organization do their budget allocation and fund their initiatives or projects for the next 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, whatever is the duration that they're wanting to plan. So the most important thing is that you got a budget, you got a funding, you got a whole bunch of ideas. You want to look at different dimensions. You could prioritize based on multiple different criteria. That could be very manual. It could become very sophisticated. You could do a lot of what if scenario planning, saying if this happens, let me see what's the outcome. If that happens, let me see what is the outcome. But at the end of it, what you're looking at is to decide that, hey, I'm going to fund A, B, C, D initiatives or ideas or projects, whatever you call it, ABCD ideas for the next 6 months or for the next 1 year. And once that prioritization is done, then obviously you want to make sure that you execute it, execute it well, within budget, within time, etc., and make sure that whatever are your key objectives out of those projects are delivered. If it is a service organization, you might be focusing on profitability. If it's a internal IT, corporate IT organization, you might be focusing on new market capture or whatever is the objective of the initiative that you're focusing on. Now, Lean Agile portfolio management actually puts it in a very different context. It's trying to do the same thing, but from a very different point of view. So Lean portfolio management takes an approach to say, okay, because we do not know which outcome will succeed, and because there are just too many dynamic variables in modern day systems and planning, because it's going to be very dynamic, let's not worry about funding an entirely different project, because once we start with it and we go to the market, we might altogether need to pivot and build something else. So what they would focus on is say, okay, let us fund a whole group of people. Let's say I want to fund a team of 100 people or a team of 200 people, whatever it is. I'll start with a bunch of ideas, whatever be the prioritization mechanism, doesn't matter, but I'll start with a bunch of ideas. I'll start working on those ideas based on that, whatever prioritization process I have, and then quickly measure whether I'm getting the expected outcome. And if I'm not, then I'm going to pivot around and say, okay, I'm going to end this here, let me pick up the next. So Lean portfolio management is a lot more practical and a lot more, I would say, apt for the way that modern systems are today, where it is very difficult and very hard to say this is exactly what the market wants. I know upfront what is going to be, what is the market need. So let me spend the next 100% months to be able to go ahead and build it and then roll it out, and bang, it will be an awesome success. So if you do not have that surety, which is the case, I think, with most systems and most teams today, and you accept the fact that we are going to continuously pivot and keep experimenting, then this approach makes more sense, because you fund a team and you're continuously listening to feedback in terms of what idea to fund, persist, continue development, or drop it, pivot it, and move to something else. A program, in contrast, has a lot more bigger perspective. So a program, let's say if you're talking about, let's say an IT service organization is talking about managing all the insurance projects in a particular geography, let's say across the European region, then they would have qualitative objectives, they would have quantitative objectives, and they would have to balance all of these together to make sure that their stakeholder expectations are delivered. Their stakeholders could be obviously their customers, it could be the industry and the domain that they represent, it could be their internal stakeholders and the management and the leadership, it could be the people who are working as part of the program. But essentially, when you're managing a program, you're not just looking at one thing at a time and ensuring that, okay, this becomes successful. You're looking at a much more broader perspective to make sure that I'm able to do not just what that one project or that one idea is, but I'm taking a much more broader context to say, okay, that project or idea is in the context of a whole bunch of other ecosystem, and how does how does that whole ecosystem succeed as an overall objective. Let's take an example. So here's a health program, right? And I mean, I'm sure everybody has experienced how their countries have managed the whole COVID program, right? Whether it comes to rolling out their vaccinations, rolling out how they will be able to handle their patients, how they are able to quarantine and localize the spread. So it's not just one faceted dimension that they're looking at, right? If you're talking about managing your health, you would never say, hey, I want to manage my health portfolio, because a portfolio has a very strong connotation of prioritization. So you will never say that. Hopefully you don't have to, you don't reach that state, but you would never say that I have to manage my health portfolio. You say I have to manage my health program. I have to look after my physical health, I have to look after my mental health, I have to look after what's happening around my family. All those things come together when I'm managing my health program. In contrast, if you have to manage your financial portfolio, you have a very focused objective, your outcome and objective in your mind. And you are very clearly looking at that, okay, I'm going to have this much in my kitty. How do I go ahead and allocate that across all the different options that I have so that I reach to a particular financial objective that I have? So it's let me clarify. I'm not saying that when you do financial portfolio, you do not do, or when you do portfolio management, you do not do risk, or you do not, or you are not expected to look after people. That's not my statement. What I'm trying to highlight is when you're looking at managing a program, you're looking at a much broader picture and a much more 360-degree of what the program is under, and what and what the objective that project is supposed to be delivering, which is under the program. You take a much more broader view than when you look at a portfolio. A portfolio almost always has a concept of prioritization, alternative assessment, what if scenario, choosing some, and then going forward with it. When you do your health, you can't say I will give less importance to my mental health and I'll give more importance to my physical health. You got to take all of them together so that the overall outcome is well established. So hopefully that sets the context for the rest of the discussion that I do want to have around program management. So let's understand why things have changed, and I did refer to it earlier during the conversation. Like I said, that contrast to the earlier days when we used to do traditional project management or program management, in the world that we live today in, outcomes cannot be guaranteed. We start the whole premise of the lean agile paradigm is that you got to build early, and you got to make sure that yes, I go to the market and I get my feedback that I'm on the right track. This is what my people are expecting, what my customers are expecting, and then based on that feedback, I continue to build and I continue to iterate. And this is pretty unique to knowledge services. I would say I'm no expert on manufacturing or the construction industry, but I would assume, and I think I'm pretty right, knowing how work is divided and split. When you do a metro construction project or any large engineering project, how work is split across hundreds of vendors, and yet it absolutely comes to the T when it all needs to come together and needs to get integrated. Clearly, software is still not reached that level of maturity to be able to say that yes, we really can predict that this is what exactly will be the outcome when we finally take it to the market right there. So traditional planning was based on estimates, right? Because we started with the premise that we knew what had to be done, so therefore estimation made sense. And despite that premise, the fact is it would inevitably fail. So we used to always plan based on this bucket of contingency, which would kind of say that, okay, if pretty much that the law of averages would work out. If X is slipping by 20%, hopefully something else will slip less by 20%, and I will have some contingency to be able to make up for it. But it was a kind of game of chance. It was a game of luck to say, okay, everything goes right as planned, because that was hardly to be expected. And most leadership and management accepted the fact that that would not be the case. And so they would tolerate a level of contingency. If it was a low risk project, they would accept low risk, a low level of contingency. If it was a high risk project, they would clearly expect a greater level of contingency and would be ready for it. So the expectations from program management, what leaderships expect when you say that, hey, I need a program manager to manage this whole program, that expectation has not changed in terms of the qualitative dimensions that I talked about or the quantitative dimensions that I talked about. The problem is that the nature of what we are trying to track inside that program has significantly changed. Right? If you're now responsible to say that, okay, I want to go to a particular market and I want to grow my market share by 20%, and you're not sure that, okay, that this idea that I'm going to try is a very definite answer to that problem. I'm going to experiment it out. I'm going to do what we love to call as hypothesis driven development, and then see how the whole concept works and how it revolves. So if what you're building is very fluid, then it's obvious that you need a very fluid approach for doing qualitative and quantitative dimension tracking and measurement. Right? No longer can you take a very rigid approach, because you know that what I'm starting with today would not work. Very high chance that it would not work, and therefore I have to keep recalibrating what I need to do. So if you apply lean agile principles to program management, you would generally expect these things, right? You would expect reduced lead times, lower inventory costs. By inventory costs, I mean how many number of items that you're working on at any given point of time, improved productivity, greater quality, higher customer satisfaction because you're continuously taking feedback. And definitely lean portfolio management typically has focused around one of these dimensions, which is focusing value. And nothing wrong with that. It is perhaps one of the most important aspects. If you do not deliver value, then the whole point is lost. The thing that I'm trying to highlight today is that it is not just adequate to just focus on value delivery, but you need to focus on all these qualitative dimensions as well to make sure that the overall program succeeds, not just that one project or one initiative that you are doing the value delivery from. Okay, so if you look at the scale agile literature, and it makes absolute sense, it's focused on value delivery as part of that project team or whatever the team is delivering on a continuous basis. Obviously, like we said, new age planning cannot be based on estimates, and so we fall back to the next best option, which is velocity, right? So we essentially say, okay, if I have a team that can deliver 100 cards per month, if there are 100 points per month, whatever is the unit of measurement that you're comfortable with, and then you say, okay, if I'm delivering at 100 points per month, and I then need a team which can deliver 200 points I can then need to have a team that can deliver 100 points per month. If I now have an application that needs 200 points per month to be delivered, I know roughly what do I need to do to be able to scale to that size of delivery. Now, very clearly, this can be done, as I said, based on throughput, number of cards per unit time. But again, there's a lot of guesswork, right? To what level of granularity I kind of design my story cards or my technical story cards, whatever I'm doing, or my tickets, whatever is flowing in. There is a fair bit of flexibility in terms of how a team can actually play these numbers around with, right? And at the end of the day, it becomes difficult to plan because one team's concept of points is not the same as another team's concept of points. So we take a relative scale to say, okay, if I don't want to be able to spend a whole bunch of time and effort in just doing an estimation, let me just do a quick relative sizing to say, okay, this card looks similar to this. If this has taken earlier 10, 5 sprints, if this epic has earlier similar epic has taken 5 sprints, or with one scrum team, then okay, let me go ahead with that plan to begin with and see what it takes. So we have moved from planning from estimates to planning based on velocity. Earlier, when we used to start about, I would say 7-8 years back, we used to take a very planning poker based approach to be able to say, do that sizing, which still fundamentally relied on a sizing model, though it was a lot more approximate and a gut feel based. And increasingly, agile teams have now moved to relative sizing because it's faster, it's quicker, and it serves the purpose that you need to get a sense that, hey, a card of this size earlier has taken me X number of sprints given a team of this size. So how do we do it right? And the Kanban method has several approaches to be able to actually solve this problem. Let's step back and understand what kind of work do we typically get. Typically, you get these two buckets of work. Either you get major projects, new projects, or major enhancements, within an existing product or an application that you have, or you get continuous stream of tickets, right? Which is flow based. It's a continuous flow that is happening, and you can obviously apply Kanban in any other, in either of the situations. That is not an issue at all. Clearly, if you get continuous major enhancements or projects, you would essentially use something like a story mapping technique to break it up into the number of stories that you will potentially have. Use your past velocity to predict the number of sprints or time duration that you will need. And once you get that number, if that number is too long, then you will go back to business and negotiate, saying, hey, we can't do this much. Let's prioritize and say, what can we fit in within the time that you have? And obviously you would have your past lead time data to be able to go back to business and say, hey, I'm not being subjective, I'm giving you objective data, real data of what has happened in the past. So let's now have a meaningful discussion that how much we need to prioritize and what we can really do within the timeline that you're planning to be done. If it's a continuous stream of tickets, then very clearly the scrum based approach becomes very difficult, because obviously you can't commit to a fixed scope for any given period of time. So you have a continuous flow of work, and then you essentially go ahead and say, okay, if when a ticket comes, how much time it's going to take, and what is its SLA going to be, what is going to be its turnaround time. And again, Kanban's approach comes directly to our rescue to be able to answer that question. So let's look at them in a little more detail as to what a whole program delivery would look at when we're looking at the quantitative aspect of that program. So if I look at these two branches, right, if I look at a large scope that is coming in, and let me just do a quick time check. So if I look at a large scope that is coming in, it could come in from an OKR based approach, or if you have initiatives and themes that you are working on, you would then break it up into stories, find stories using a method like story mapping, perhaps the most well-defined and established model to really break it up into small independent stories, following the INVEST principle. And then you will have something like a portfolio Kanban to really be able to see the progress from the stories to the epic, from the epic to the themes. I don't want to get too much into the Swift Kanban tool, but you can use a tool like Swift Kanban to to really show that in an awesome fashion what that would look like. Once you get the epics and stories, you're now ready for actual grooming of it, right? You can now go to and start defining their acceptance criteria. You can go in and start defining all their visual layouts and the user experience. So you can start doing all that stuff as you have finished your story mapping process itself. On the other hand, you have your continuous flow of work items. They come in small work items. You would just prioritize them. Kanban has this concept of class of service to really understand what should I work on now, and you will use that basis to prioritize X over Y, and that basically becomes your backlog, right? So the product owner and the product management team owns this side of the whole pipeline, and to be able to say, okay, this is the backlog, how we'll prioritize, what we are going to pick up next. That's what they're working on. So that's what there are now, as I said, there are many ways to prioritize. The Kanban method has a wonderful enterprise services planning. It's a risk-based framework approach that you can go ahead and do your prioritization with. It's a very configurable approach, so that you are not hardwired to doing your risk-based assessment in only one given certain way. Or you could do it based on a simple lead time forecast, that hey, if I take this work item on 1st of January, then based on my past similar cards, that they have taken 30 days to get done for 80% time. So 30 days has been the forecast. If I from the day that I start, then when do I need to start, so that I make sure that it hits the expected due date for this ticket resolution. So you essentially look at the lead time based probabilistic forecasting to be able to say whether I should take it now, whether I should delay it, or is it okay if I take it as a standard card, or it will be too late if I take it as a standard class of service card. Let me take it now as an expedite card, so that I can match the due date that the business expects it with. And then, like I said, you do the full grooming of it, right? You essentially need to make sure that you groom it properly, so that when it goes to the downstream team, you're not then stuck saying, I don't have an answer to this question. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what we need to do here. Let me get back to business. So it's important to make sure that you groom it right. From my personal experience, a lot of teams are obsessed with the development work, with how the development teams function. If you get your grooming done right, development works like a magic. If you have a 2-week sprints, in almost very high level of certainty, they'll be able to deliver what the sprint scope is. Might be there is an occasion spillover, but nothing to worry about. They will deliver in 2 weeks what they have committed to do. The problem is when the grooming is weak, and you get into a lot of questions back and forth, you get into blockers, you get into verification questions back with the business saying, I don't know what happens if you do in this scenario, and that then slows down the entire downstream pipeline. So strong best practice guideline, focus on grooming it right and grooming it complete, define your acceptance criteria, make sure there are no open-ended questions. If required, get some of the technical people to help you with the grooming process, so that once the downstream team picks up the card, it can go zoom, it can go zip zap zoom. Absolutely. So once you have groomed it, and you really have to groom story, you can then do your sprint planning, or if you are doing your a pure Kanban based execution, you can do a replenishment planning and make sure that, okay, let's take it up now, it's ready to go now because it's fully groomed. There are no blockers as far as we can see at this point of time. That's when the downstream team comes up, they pick it up for execution. I think this part everybody understands, whether you are doing Scrum or Kanban or Scrumban, some kind of an execution model. You're looking at your cumulative flow diagram, you're looking at your WIP, you're looking at your burn down charts, making sure that things are not piling up, and work gets delivered. I think this part, I would say almost most agile teams have become very good at. I think the problem where most of the teams land up is in the upstream part. The other part, which most teams have really not even thought about, is this part, which is, what do I go and talk to my business about? So, okay, I'm delivering to a certain scope. Now you wanted 100 cards. I'm delivering at the rate of 15 cards. The sprint team has said, okay, 15 cards need to be done. But guess what? The business wanted to be done in 3 months, in 1 quarter. If I can deliver it only in 3 months, how do I, at which point of time I go back to business and say, hey, these 100 cards are not going to happen in 3 months. So I really need to take them into action, into the process, prioritize with them, look at the whole cycle. I need to have that whole discussion with them. I need to either have a scoping discussion with them, or I need to have a capacity discussion with them. And if possible, one should also be open to saying, hey, can the team improve its productivity by doing certain things, by making sure that your process improvement happens, and you use your better standards, you improve your best practices and guidelines, you reduce your rework, things like that. But all these things need to come together to do program management, to make sure that the quantitative aspects of that program are delivered. You cannot just focus in isolation and say, okay, sprints are happening, great, and let's move on. That just doesn't serve the purpose completely. Now, I'm taking some snapshots from the Swift Kanban tool, but by all means, you can absolutely do this in Excel if you want to. It is not so please don't take this as an assumption that okay, you got to use Swift Kanban. Obviously, we have a view of how you can use the Kanban method for better program management, and therefore I'm using the Swift Kanban tool to be able to say how it can help you do that. But you could do it by any other tool if you have a certain level of discipline and data tracking to back you. So here's a simple Gantt view, right? It's a simple Gantt view that says, okay, if this is the theme, by when would the theme get done? And let's say in this scenario, if I was expecting it to be done by the planned date of 30th November, then going at the rate of throughput today, when it would go ahead and actually get done. Now, as I said, that's a simple Gantt view that, okay, I see a certain level of slippage, but what do I do now? Just saying I will have slippage doesn't serve the purpose. So you've got to look at, now this is obviously, I'm just showing how this could look, right? I could be slipping small, in which case I could choose to just continue with it and not worry too much about it. I'll just deal with the business as it happens. Or I could be slipping big, and in which case I really need to go ahead and go back to business and work with them to be able to figure out what do I need to do. Now, once you go ahead and figure out that you're slipping, obviously you need to identify what is slipping, right? Which epic is slipping. It's not that the whole program is slipping. It could be that there are a few pockets of capabilities that you're wanting to build, which is where your bulk of the problem is. And so if you focus on that, you'll be able to figure out what to do. Remember theory of constraints, right? Identify the constraint, submit your resources to the constraint, make sure that that constraint is alleviated until the system throughput improves, so that the next constraint emerges. So you keep improving based on identifying where your bottleneck and constraint is. So you then look at, if I look at this particular theme inside my program and say, okay, this is the expected date. If I continue with at the current pace, I'm going to have a timeline spillover of 17 days, or I'm going to have a scope spillover if I want to stick to the same timeline of 2 cards. And obviously this is just a data to show an example, but think about that. If your scope spillover was 20 cards or 50 cards, in which case it would not have been an easy decision to say, okay, which 2 cards, which 20 or which 30 cards do I take out? So you now understand to say, okay, I am going at a certain velocity. I can increase my velocity, and a common approach often that people take, unfortunately, or whatever be it, but a common approach that people take to improve velocity is to throw some more people at the problem. It's okay, hopefully we'll be able to churn out more, even if teams understand that I will not get the proportionate value. And then they look at, okay, how much can whether I can bridge that entire gap by just improving my velocity. If I can't, let me go back to business and see Can I buy more time, or do I need to do my scope adjustment? Right. So I have a certain demand rate at which scope is improving, at which my scope is increasing. I have a certain capability rate, and I need to be able to match up the two to be able to make sure that yes, the final objective happens. Now, if you're just looking at first exploring whether I can solve the problem by doing some engineering efficiency, productivity improvement, process improvement, people improvement. So you need to look at, okay, how can I do that by getting a whole view of who all are working on your large program. Remember, large program can have huge number of people spread across multiple locations. It's not always one simple team located in one location with one or two scrum teams. That's not what large programs are all about. If that doesn't work for you, or it only works up to a limited extent, then you need to look at your scope dimension. So you look at your scope to say, okay, in this scope I have, in this theme I have so many epics, I have so many stories, these stories are so much size. What can I go ahead and take out of this to be able to make sure that I'm able to meet the date? So it's important to get a cross project view, a cross initiative view, a multi-board view, a cross multi-board view, to focus on that program and say, in this program, what is happening across? It doesn't matter in which team, in which project. I need to get a view of the scope to say whether my program is on track quantitatively or my program is not going to happen. Now, all this is pretty deterministic, right? If you look at this velocity based prediction, we know that this is pretty deterministic. Kanban teaches us that, guess what, real life is never so deterministic. There are too many ponderables and too many variables that can actually make things deviate from how your past is showing you. So it's a good start, but if you want to plan better, look at the probability that you want to plan for with. So Kanban teaches us the approach to say, hey, look at the lead time distribution. In this case, this is my lead time distribution curve. Look at the lead time distribution and understand that for that given forecast, what is the associated probability? So if you look at this as an example, my probability of being able to deliver 50 cards within the next 30 days is only about 25%. And if I want to improve my projection to the business, then very clearly I need to bring it down and give a forecast which will be much lower, but that will have a higher degree of probability associated, that I can tell to the business that I'm 80% confident that I'll be able to deliver about 20 cards in the next 30 days. And that's a much more surer way to plan. If you want to prioritize, let's prioritize now and focus on those 20 cards that absolutely need to happen. There is no point of planning for 50 cards because the probability of the team hitting 50 cards is not too great. So most management teams ask the question, when can I get it? Right? Here's the scope. By when can I get it? By when will I have it? And the best practice and the guideline around is to flip the question and say, hey, when do you need it? Right? Because if you tell me when do you need it, then I can understand that, okay, if you have another 60 days by when you need it, then I can tell you that in those 60 days, how many cards I can get done with an 80% confidence probability. And that will then help me plan better with you to say, okay, let's now prioritize from the backlog to say which are those 50 or 60 cards that I am confident about with an 80% probability that would get done. So it's very important to have that discussion with the business and understand when they need it and what is the probability associated with which they are comfortable with. If it's obviously a very high visibility, high stakeholder visibility initiative or a program, very clearly they would need a high level of probability confidence to make sure that, yes, let's at least go to the market with this much. If we can get something later, great, we'll consider it as a good luck. On the other hand, so all that I talked about was building a large program, a large epic, a large initiative. But think about a scenario where there's continuously flow, which is a second kind of a program that you're working on, where the work is continuously flowing and streaming into your team. So Kanban helps you associate and say that, okay, what is the forecast date if you start this card today? So I've taken some screenshots again, and it's doing a very simple lead time distribution. You can go ahead and essentially choose the criteria. So you can say, okay, I want to go ahead and choose a criteria of user stories which has standard class of service. If you say I have user stories as standard class of service, the next time I get a user story with that standard class of service, I'm going to match the lead time distribution and say I have an 80% confidence. So the 80% confidence number here would be somewhere around here. And I'm going to say that that is going to be my number, is going to be this number here. Is going to be, if you can see this 80% number here, is going to be this number here. So I'm going to need that many days. In this example, let's say around 55 days. So that would be my projected outcome if I consider this as a standard class of service. That would be my forecast date. Now, in this example, let's take a scenario where this card is tagged to this release, but the forecast date for this is clearly later. So obviously, if I just continue to work on this as a standard class of service, I'm going to miss the release. If it's absolutely critical, I need to then make sure that I expedite it and make sure that I hit this release date. So I hope you get you're able to appreciate how a Kanban based thinking helps you to quantitatively look at all the aspects around making sure that this program succeeds, that I get a high CSAT score, I'm able to meet my SLAs and my business expectation, and all the aspects of the planning cycle are able to perform. Now, we talked about the quantitative dimensions. Let's look at the qualitative dimensions, right? So if I look at the qualitative dimensions, like I said, I could look at a very simple, lightweight board, right? Like you could just go to Trello and just track your risks, action items, issues, whatever you have. It works, but if you want to be more disciplined and more systematic and more diligent about it and make sure that things don't slip left, right, and center, then you need a lot more sophistication here. So here's a program board that can help you track the qualitative aspects. And once again, it is just a sample. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but what you can do here, what you can see here is that there's a swim lane to track your issues and action items. You have a swim lane to track your risks. Risks can be positive, risks can be negative. You want to make sure that both of them, that you are able to amplify your positive risks, you are minimizing your negative risks, you're monitoring the outcomes. You can track your continuous improvement ideas, whatever you are coming out of your retrospectives or your improvement cycles, whatever is the process that you follow in that system. It is very important to think about aging. My experience with most of these qualitative dimensions is people lose focus. People are obsessed with the quantitative dimensions simply because it's easy to measure. It's very visible. So it's very visible to say, hey, that velocity is slipping by, or I'm not going to be able to meet my scope, or whatever is my planned number of cards. So it becomes very visible. All focus drives on that direction. People completely miss the completely miss the perspective on the quantitative dimensions. So it's very important to understand and focus on the aging of the card that you have when you're looking at the quantitative dimensions. And anytime if the card is aging, in a tool like ours, you can actually put thresholds to be able to say whether it is red, amber, green. Very clearly, if a card is aging within a column, very high probability that the overall card will also get delayed. So it makes more sense to look at the column level aging than to just look at the card level aging. So focus on the aging of the card and keep your radar on all the qualitative cards that you have as far as the program management is concerned. Make sure that you do not apply whip on your risks. It's a good idea in many cases. On a few cases, it's a bad idea. You don't want to put a whip on your risks. If you have a risk, you want to know about it. You want to make sure that you do something about it, even if you accept it. And acceptance is an absolutely defined strategy as far as a risk is concerned. But at least you're consciously accepting that risk and be prepared for it, making sure that your stakeholders and leadership understand that, hey, this is a risk. We are going to accept it. We'll see what happens. We think that that if it does materialize, the impact would be manageable and we'll be able to absorb it. But accept it. Make sure that you are able to publish it and everybody in your leadership team understands it. Make sure that you're able to build your dependencies between all your qualitative aspects. So if you have a risk which is dependent on a principal engineer to be recruited, make sure that you have put the dependency so that if that recruitment fails, that risk is now materialized. It's now an issue. It's no more a risk. And you need to now at that point of time do something about the issue. Whatever it is, whether you need to go and get a contractor to be able to mitigate that risk, but you need to act on that risk because that risk has now been converted into an issue. It is no longer a potential risk. So you need the ability to be able to identify dependencies in a visual manner on your board so that you are able to trap when the dependencies fail so that things get highlighted and escalated. So I have about 10 minutes left. I hope that I have been able to give you an assessment about, to begin with, where program management and where portfolio management differ. To reiterate, portfolio management is focused on value delivery, making sure that outcome, especially lean portfolio management, that outcome happens. Program management takes a lot more holistic view of multiple dimensions. It could be around growing your market share. It could be going around growing your teams and making sure that your people satisfaction scores are high. It could be around risk management and making sure that your risks are mitigated, making sure that all your stakeholders are well connected and fully aware of what's happening in the program in its totality. That's program management. I talked about the different quantitative dimensions and the qualitative aspects of program management. And I helped and I kind of put forth what are all the different techniques around the quantitative aspects of program management. You could do velocity driven program management, which is very deterministic, or you could do probability based program quantitative tracking of your program, which is based on lead time distribution and helps you to have a lot more mature conversation with your business and a realistic conversation with your business to say what really can be accomplished. I then finally reiterated about the qualitative aspects, about how it's important to actually visualize all the qualitative issues that you're tracking, whether it is risks, whether it is action items, whether it is issues, whether it is continuous improvement, whether it is recruitment, any number of these things that you want to track for your program. Make sure that you have your dependencies tracked. Make sure that you're looking at your aging of the cards so that you don't lose focus and you don't land up in a situation that everything looks hunky-dory from the program delivery perspective, but there's a major risk that completely damages whatever you have done and your team has put its effort in. I want to rest it here and I'm open for questions.
Great session, Sudhi, as always. Folks, we have about 6 minutes left. So if you have questions, please send those in using the questions box that you have on your screens. Sudhi, there's a question about, is there any literature that we can share or links that we can share to other reading material on Agile program management?
Most, unfortunately, no. Most of the literature that is around lean portfolio management. and perhaps the most amount of work that has been done and in a sustained way to focus around that is in the Scale Agile community. So and they have used very clearly a lot of the Kanban thinking to actually focus on the value delivery at that level, at the portfolio level. But no, they haven't also focused on program management. And yes, there is very little literature around that, and that's been the problem. That's been the problem because most people think that if we just do portfolio management, all the other aspects of program management are covered, and that is not true. Portfolio program management is a lot more holistic, and you need to look at a lot more aspects. Sorry about that.
All right, no worries. Okay, there's a question about. First of all, a couple of questions about the recording being made available, folks. So yes, we will provide the link to the recording as soon as it is up in at the most in a day or two. So no worries on that count. There's a question from Balaji. What estimation technique will apply for the programs initiated new that do not have velocity or other predictability measures based on? So essentially the lack of past data. What do you do in those cases?
So the simplest approach would be do not take a velocity-based approach. Get it started, let it run for a couple of months, get some velocity data, and then use it. So it's far better to be able to get some past data and then use that for tracking your then use that for a subsequent sprints than to hypothetically get into some number and get into a very unpleasant conversation on, oh, why is this not happening and that not happening, and why are we wrong, and why is that number not getting matched, why did past experience did not work. It's just not worth it. Past experience was for a different project, different time, different bunch of people, so just not worth it. Use plain Kanban based thinking, flow based execution, get the throughput data for a couple of months, 4-5 sprints. Once you have that, then start using that data for your velocity based tracking and planning if you really want to run it in sprints.
Excellent. There's a comment from Chris Smith who says the compliment that great webinar, and he noticed the 10 years at the corner in the logo, and yeah, being complimentary about how we have been doing this for the last 10 years and have a lot of depth in terms of use of Kanban and quantitative methods and visual methods essentially to help you manage things that have been for far too long stuck in a sort of more traditional world, which have directly contributed some of the challenges that technology products have or projects have dealt with in terms of their successful delivery.
Thanks, Chris.
There's another question from Reza, and the question is, how should a good multi-program visualization look like? That's a great question. Actually, I was going to also bring that up. That a lot of this depends on how well do you think through your overall Kanban board design and your work hierarchy in order to manage, firstly to model the boards and the work very well, and then to be able to visualize and collect data at the right levels across the different boards. So any guidance?
So, I've given a certain start, by no means any benchmark, but I've just given a start. Beyond that, I would say inspect and adapt. I think the most important thing is to recognize that having a board or a value stream is only perhaps 20 or 25% to 30% of the problem. Most of teams and organizations struggle in terms of a disciplined approach to execute and close. It's across my over three decades, teams fail again and again not in identifying the problem. Teams fail again and again, repeatedly again and again. I can't emphasize that as many number of agains I say, in executing and closing an item. And the problem, therefore, is that it is not that people do not know. It is just that people have not kept the focus to do a disciplined closure of the items. It's a very common pattern in retrospectives. Action items are identified. Those action items just keep lingering on. Very, very common pattern in retrospectives. So make a start. It's not, it's absolutely okay if the, you know, if you make a start with a simple to do kind of a task board and take it from there. But at least make sure that you are identifying the risks, you're and your issues and action items, you're identifying your improvement things, you're identifying your people challenges, people sentiment, dissatisfaction issues, things of that nature. At least put that card on the board. The minute you put that card on the board and you start tracking its aging, you will do something about it. I think that's far more of an important step. And then to make sure that you are closing it. Then I'm sure the team will contribute to making sure that, okay, how do we make the value stream better so that we are looking at how the card does not age and we are able to close it on time. So just make a start, I would say, make a start, make the issues known, and make sure that somebody has a, I think one of the problems in agile management is we have not identified and categorically called out who will focus on this. Clearly, it's not, a scrum manager is not looking at it. A product owner is not looking at it. Who's looking at it? Is there anybody in the organization who has a specific agenda or a charter or a stated job description to say, you are responsible for this program, which is following an agile way of thinking and principles? And unfortunately, that has not been called out in the community.
Just so you are aware, folks on the webinar, we do have a white paper on our website that we could possibly share a link to, which talks a little bit about how to go about organizing your Kanban boards. It's probably one of the more downloaded papers on our site. So it's not an unusual problem. So something for you to also take a look at. All right, I think we are at the bottom of the hour, I guess. So we are very glad that you were able to join us all today. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And if you have any questions, I'm going to actually share my last slide here so that you're able to get our contact information. And just make sure that you have that. If you would like to reach out to Sudhi or to us in terms of questions, follow-up questions on the topic that was covered today, as well as about learning about some of the capabilities that we provide with Swift Kanban, should you be interested in that, please do reach out to us, and we'd be happy to work with you on program management, portfolio management, or other aspects of improving your overall project and program delivery. So with that, Sudhi, thanks a lot. Great session, and I'm sure we're going to do many more of these in the coming year. Thank you.
Thanks guys. Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.